more extreme heat events.
Fires have burned tens of thousands of square kilometers of land across the country.
This is big for Ontario. Hamilton, Toronto, Windsor are highly exposed cities.
An EF0 tornado.
Nobody can stop a tornado.
Oh my God!
I noticed it was raining in the house.
So the roof was gone?
The roof completely gone.
I jumped in the truck and all of a sudden chunks of tree were landing on top of the truck. And I drove like crazy to get out of there.
The evidence is in front of our face.
From extreme heat, non-stop rain, droughts, wildfires, and smoke, Ontario is once again seeing record-breaking weather. The climate is changing, and it's happening faster than predicted.
In June, we had 12 consecutive months where the temperature was above 1.5 degrees Celsius on average globally. So what that means is that we reached that point where, in the Paris Agreement, we said we would do everything possible to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to not reach 1.5. Now 1.5 in the long term. So if that occurs year after year after year, then we've hit that threshold of climate change where more change is irreversible. When we last year were hitting every month, this was the warmest on record, warmest on record, warmest on record, and by the amount that was the warmest, scientists around the world were saying we're flabbergasted by this, which is an intense word to use. The expectation was that that would happen much later and that it wouldn't happen over consecutive months in the way that it did.
From 2023 and into 2024, Canada-wide, we had unprecedented weather extremes. We experienced wildfires on a scale never seen before. In Thunder Bay, the first ever December with an average temperature above zero at 2.7 degrees Celsius. In February, we hit 16 degrees in Toronto. Records continued to be broken in July.
With that warming comes more increase of storms, especially for Ontario, southern Ontario. Those strong windy storms that we see coming through, they're more intense. When a rainfall event occurs, it can be more intense. And so those 1 in 100 storms, we might have them more often.
Natalie Harris has lived the consequences of our weather at its worst.
Holy shit. Oh my God, a tornado just hit our house.
Going back to July 15th, 2021, what happened that day? I kind of forget what I was doing, but because I have such a great relationship with my ex-partner and we have a son together and we share dogs, I was like, well, I'm just going to pop by. I'm just going to go say hi. It happens all the time, unannounced. And I knew my son was at home and the dogs were there. Adam's room is upstairs, so he was upstairs. So he came down to the main floor and said hi to me, and his phone kept ringing, and he was ignoring it at first. Finally, he answered it, and it was his dad. And there had been a thunderstorm warning, and he had noticed a big garbage can was picked up and thrown into a car. So he's like, wow, there's a storm coming. So he called and said, Adam, just take the dogs into the basement.
That potentially saved your lives.
It absolutely did. We knew we would be home in 5 minutes, grabbed a blanket, grabbed the dogs, walked down because it wasn't a tornado warning yet. We heard the house started shaking. And Adam said, that sounds like a tornado. It's so loud, there's dust falling on us. And my instinct was to go upstairs and see what was going on. I don't know why. Adam was like, no, Mom, you're not going upstairs. But I couldn't hear him. He had to turn my face so I could see him. And he had to mouth that to me, like, you're not going upstairs.
And so what happens next?
It finally stops. I had my phone, so I wanted to show John what had happened. I turned on the recording.
Oh my God!
We had other people's furniture in, there was rugs, carpets that weren't John's in the hall. And then I turned the corner and I noticed it was raining in the house.
Adam, the roof is gone! The roof is gone!
On that day, researchers from Western University were closely tracking the storm.
Well, that was a day when we were expecting big supercell thunderstorms. So these are thunderstorms where the storms themselves rotate and they can cause the most intense tornadoes. So there was a tornado risk that day. And we just thought the risk was a bit further north. And when the tornadoes started happening, it was down in Barrie. There was debris in the air. This was a serious situation. And it was a strength of tornado where you can actually see a lot of the weaknesses in buildings.
With the expected increase in storm activity, survivors like Natalie now live with a deep-seated fear that the number of tornadoes may also be increasing.
I've grown up having tornado nightmares. I felt, am I dreaming? Right. Am I actually dreaming? Is this really real? The evidence is everywhere that we are getting more warnings. We are having much more severe wind. Even if it's not a tornado, it's extreme. And that's, I feel, what we're dealing with in this generation.
There's this perception that there are more tornadoes, because we're seeing them in headlines, we're seeing them on social media, we're seeing them in the news. Are they occurring more frequently?
Climate change is going to lead to change. It's just what kind of change. The study that I had done in Southern Ontario, looking at about over 100 years of data, it didn't show any big change in the number of tornadoes. But what it did show is that the big tornadoes are occurring later in the season than they used to. It used to be kind of May, June was the period where you get the big tornadoes. Now it's more like late July, August, maybe even into September where we're getting the big tornadoes. So that's a big change, and it might have something to do with the lakes, because the lakes stay warm longer in the fall, right? And the lakes, climate change is having an impact on the lakes, on the temperature of the lakes. It might be a change in intensity, it might be a change in the timing, during the year. It might be that the storm track starts to move a bit north, more tornadoes in Northern Ontario. It also might be that our season starts to get longer, because if we're getting warmer in general, our tornadoes could start earlier and end later.
August 17th, 2024, a tornado touches down near Ayr, Ontario, just a few minutes off Highway 401.
Unfortunately, there was a tornado that went through here a couple days ago. The Northern Tornadoes Project rated it as an EF1 tornado with maximum wind speeds of 165 kilometers an hour.
Tornadoes are rated on the enhanced Fujita scale. An EF0 causes minor damage with speeds equivalent to a galloping gazelle. By EF3, the damage is severe, with winds traveling more than twice the speed of a sprinting cheetah. And at the top of the scale, an EF5 causes incredible destruction, racing along at over 320 kilometers per hour, the speed of the fastest Formula One cars.
It traveled for at least 5 kilometers on the ground, causing a lot of damage to thousands of trees that were snapped and uprooted. There were many houses that were damaged, especially lots of shingles ripped off or trees falling on houses. There was a barn right behind me here that had significant damage to its roof, and there was also a home hardware that had significant damage, and some other structures as well. So lots of damage, lots to be cleaned up. Everyone's hard at work.
Aaron and the team collect detailed information to more accurately describe the size and behavior of tornadoes in Ontario.
We also bring drones. We have our regular kind of quadcopter drones. We also have a bigger drone. It's a fixed wing drone called a Windsor 1, and we can use that to map an area. So we're doing some of that today. We are taking hundreds or thousands of photos along the whole tornado path, and then we can stitch those photos together to make a high resolution map of the damage. And then another thing we brought an orthomosaic camera, which is kind of like a Google Street View camera, which people might be familiar with. Thanks, good luck, drive safe. And we drove down some of the neighborhoods that had the worst damage to capture, so we can compare what the Street View imagery looked like before the tornado and after the tornado.
We want to know where tornadoes occur most often. And in fact, there is a tornado alley in Southern Ontario, and it's caused by the Great Lakes, basically. The lakes actually enhance the amount of tornado activity in between them. So what you end up with in Southern Ontario is this corridor that goes from like Windsor, Sarnia, up through KW and Guelph, just north of Toronto, and keeps going out into Eastern Ontario, and you can see it in the data. There's this line of enhanced tornado occurrence, and even some of the strongest tornadoes have occurred in this line.
Feels like a highway has been built there, hasn't it? Just kind of like, isn't that the 401?
It's pretty much right along the 401, yeah.
Our northern version of Tornado Alley sees the majority of our nation's most powerful supercell storms, making Ontario the tornado capital of Canada.
When we look at the curve of climate change, and we're just looking at an average increase in temperature, the extremes on the curve are also shifting. So with that increase in temperature, our extremes become more extreme.
This derecho whipped through Southern Ontario.
While severe thunderstorm watches and warnings were issued, this is actually being classified as a derecho.
We had a series or a cluster of downbursts that moved through southern Ontario into southern Quebec in 2022, May 21st, that caused almost 1,000 kilometers of continuous damage. And when you get to that scale of downburst damage, you call it a derecho.
All right, so to add on top of tornadoes and downbursts, we got derechos. What is it, derechos?
It derives from Spanish straight, whereas tornado also has a Spanish origin, it's like to turn. They typically occur along the northern edges of heat domes. You're looking at a continuous path of damage for at least 600, 700 kilometers and about 100 kilometers wide minimum. And the 2022 derecho that hit southern Ontario into southern Quebec, that is now one of the costliest thunderstorm events in Canadian history now, with 16 fatalities and over $1 billion of damage.
Okay, baby.
The computer models that we rely on to give us a heads up about these events completely missed that. I went through them all. None of them had it forecast. And it's because, you know, it's a special kind of physics that's required for the models to be able to get right in order for it to be able to predict that kind of storm. It's just not there yet.
With every degree of increase, our atmosphere can hold more moisture, and that moisture just comes down in extreme rainfall events. We can have more storms, more windstorms. We can also have prolonged extreme heat events. So cities such as Toronto, Hamilton, Windsor are highly exposed to extreme heat and are projected to have 50 plus more days of extreme heat by 2050. And then wildfires.
An update today on the wildfire situation.
Fires have burned tens of thousands of square kilometers of land across the country, causing property damage and forcing thousands of people from their homes.
In Canada, 2023 was a year unlike any other, with a total burned area of forest nearly 6 times the average. The fires generated enough smoke to evacuate entire communities and trigger air quality warnings for millions of people across Canada and into the U.S.
Smoke is totally obnoxious. It's the small particles that get into you. It'll kill you. And that's why you can only absorb so much of it. And that's why it's so important to get people out of the path of the smoke. You have to get them out of the path of the fire, but the smoke is coming first, usually.
Tim Lynham is an expert in fire behavior and research with a career that has spanned 5 decades.
Can you take us back to when you were fighting those forest fires? What was that like?
Well, when you're 20 years old, you don't think you can die. So you don't think about dying, so you don't worry about it. It's just like an adventure. So I started off in 1975 flying on a water bomber in Manitoba. Had lots of close calls. We lost engines. Nasty things happened. In 1976, I was running a helicopter program in Geraldton. We ran out of fuel once. But we landed on the Trans-Canada Highway. We had rotor strike where the helicopter hit some trees. It was late at night and the pilot couldn't see them. But then the next year, the person who replaced me, they were all killed when the helicopter disintegrated in midair. The number one cause of death on forest fires is aircraft accidents. Water bombers crashing, helicopter accidents.
There's a lot at stake, obviously, when you think of entire communities being decimated by something that feels like it's beyond our control. How can we better prepare ourselves for what's to come?
Well, I used to think that fires were all controllable. I'm now putting them more in the class of earthquakes and tornadoes. You know, nobody can stop a tornado, nobody can stop an earthquake. We are getting to the point where we're getting more of these fires that are unstoppable. 2023 was off the Richter scale. I mean, before 2023, which was about 19 million hectares burned in Canada, our biggest was like around 7 and we've had a 6.
Tim's seen it all when it comes to forest fires, but even he was shocked by what he saw in 2023.
Birds were landing on the water because there's an envelope of air above the water, even when you have bad fires and smoke. We were totally smoked in, and the birds could not fly anymore. So it doesn't matter whether it was gulls or loons or geese, they were all huddling on the water, just floating, trying to survive. And it was so bad for us that we left. I've never been through that in my life.
The planet over the last year warmed 1.5 degrees Celsius, but Canada on average warms at double the rate. And we're going to continue to warm at double the rest of the world.
In general terms, large land masses like Canada warm faster than oceans, which cover about 70% of our planet. In addition, the thinning of the lower atmosphere at the poles concentrates the greenhouse effect. Reduced reflectivity from melting snow and ice is another factor contributing to what researchers call Arctic amplification. These and other factors combine to make Canada's rate of warming around twice that of the rest of the planet.
More extreme heat events this is big for Ontario, southern Ontario, so you're looking Hamilton, Toronto, Windsor are highly exposed cities that over the next few years are expected to have more and more hot days, so days over 30 degrees Celsius. Flooding can occur more often in these cities as well. And of course, our northern regions can be impacted by wildfire. So wildfire is a natural process for northern Ontario, northern Canada, but what we're seeing with climate change is that the wildfire season is lengthening.
Tim is now retired, but the state of the forest and the potential impacts of climate change still keep him up at night.
In 1985, I was in Boulder, Colorado with a presentation that said, we don't know for sure that climate change is caused by humans, but we'll know by 2015. We know by now. We've exceeded the high that was predicted in 1985. What we have, more of the fires are intense because there's bigger drought, we get crazy weather conditions, strong winds, more lightning, and that means once they get going, it's very difficult to stop them. They're completely beyond the range of what we can do with firefighters and water bombers.
Well, if the fire does what it wants to do, how prepared are our firefighters?
Well, they know exactly what they can and can't handle. So their number one job is to keep people safe. And the first thing that's going to affect people in communities is going to be smoke. So the smoke happens many days before a fire reaches the community, normally. So that's the biggest threat to them. It's not often that fire goes into communities, but then it's happened this year in Banff, it happened in Fort McMurray, it happened in Slave Lake, it happened in Lytton. So we know it happens, and it's gone into First Nation communities in all of the north. But almost always beforehand we have a warning because of smoke. But the modeling for smoke is much better, and it's been assisted by remote sensing. So there are satellites, the weather predictions are better. We have much better tools to predict the arrival of smoke. And because we know where the smoke is coming, we also know where the fire is. And so they generally fires don't come into the community very often and surprise people. In Banff, they had evacuated people many days in advance. They were hoping the fire wouldn't come there, but it did. And they knew there was a good chance of it, but they did the right thing. They evacuated the people because they were not going to stop that fire. You're going to have to sacrifice the community, or part of the community, and we've seen it happen. But it's going to keep happening. We have hundreds of communities in northern Canada, and they're all surrounded by boreal forest.
Which communities are vulnerable?
They're all at risk. It doesn't matter whether it's in Ontario, it's Timmins, it's Sault Ste. Marie, it's Sudbury, it's smaller communities. They all are at threat, but it's usually a perfect storm. Drought conditions, high winds like 60, 70, 80, 90 kilometers an hour, high temperatures, 30, 31, 32 degrees, and no precipitation for a long time, which has led to the drought. When that all comes together in one cauldron, then you get fires that are overwhelming, and we cannot stop them.
Do you ever have moments where you just want to scream and say, we should have been better prepared?
No, I don't feel like screaming, but I have to be honest, I kind of feel pessimistic sometimes. And I think there are things that we can do. The number one action we could take, and it's called Firesmarting. Firesmarting is the national program, but it's about how do you live on your land when the forest is next to you, but you do it in a safer way. And one of the things is you don't have trees that can burn close to your property. The forest needs to be 60 feet away. Non-combustible rooftops, and possibly even having water sources like pumps and sprinklers if you have water available to you. But those things are starting to happen, which gives me hope. But it has to happen in a big way to protect communities.
In Toronto's High Park, a community prepares to light a fire to maintain the health of the forest.
This is a prescribed burn. So today we're going to burn 5 different sites. In total, it's just under 10 hectares. We'll burn one site at a time. Once that site is out, then we will move to the next site, and we'll continue doing that throughout the day.
This practice is really important, right? The land needs to be burned. It helps to support different beings when it's done in a good way. We just came out of a winter that didn't have much snow. Then last year, we didn't have a lot of water in the fall time as well. So the land is dry. And when the land is dry, when that summer comes and when it's hot, that land is more susceptible to fires. And so if there are prescribed burns that are happening in the springtime, to take away all that kindling, all that dry brush.
You're minimizing fuel in woodland, in forested areas. And so you're reducing the threat of a fire in those areas because there's not the fuel to burn.
This may seem like an unusual, even dangerous approach to wildfires, but it's something that First Nations communities have been doing for millennia.
Words, and when the singers are singing, we're calling up those ancestors, right? So, you know, we're going to help to let the lands know that we're here, that we're doing this work, right? And we're in that relationship with them.
It's diesel and gasoline mixed together.
It doesn't take much. The fuel will do, and the wind will do most of the work for us. So it just has to be coordinated, obviously, to be safe. But yeah, that's what Jay's for. He does all the math for us, and we just light it up.
We've been hearing on social media a lot of concerns from the general public about the wildlife and the impact of the burns. So it's really important for people to know that we do wildlife sweeps because that's part of our responsibility. Like I said, we see all these beings as family, as kin. And so I'm also the co-founder of Turtle Protectors. So we have volunteers from Turtle Protectors, and we also have volunteers that are from the Nature Stewards, as well as a few city staff that are going through the brush and making sure those relatives have time. So just earlier, they found a few snakes, garter snakes, and they were able to move them out of the way or to, you know, just kind of guide them out of the burn area, as well as a rabbit.
The day's first flame is sparked in the spirit of reconciliation. The practice of controlled burns by First Nations ended when the Great Lakes region was first colonized. These burns were only restarted by the city about 20 years ago.
We have teachings about fire. Fire is sacred. We're in relationship with fire, which is really important. Because of the impacts of colonization, this is about reclaiming cultural practices.
This ecosystem, this black oak savanna, it is an ecosystem that benefits from fire. So it knocks back invasive plants, so plants that are not native to this kind of ecosystem. They're not adapted to fire. And so the fire either injures them to slow down their growth or kills them completely. The other thing that it does is it creates this black ash that you see on the ground. And that black ash, it warms the soil and it also provides nutrients. So the plants that are native to this ecosystem, they benefit from that. And it helps them propagate to reproduce and grow.
Today we're taking a moment to say hello to that spirit of the fire. Let the earth know that that spirit's coming to help her. Recognize our own helpers as human beings, that we have responsibilities. When you sing with us, you're honoring that responsibility by using your voice.
While controlled burns will be impossible to apply across all of Ontario, they can help protect communities and are part of the solution on land. But it's also important to understand and prepare for what's happening in our skies. Jayanne is visiting the Wind Engineering, Energy and Environment Institute, also known as the Windy Dome.
As you can see, we have a hexagonal-shaped wind tunnel, and we have fans in all the walls, the 6 walls. Then when you have 106 fans on the wall and the ceiling, and you control each one of them, it gives you capability to generate different kind of wind system, you know, whether it's tornado, downburst, or hurricane, you know. Something new that this facility is uncovering, for the first time on a scale consistent manner, we are producing design wind load for tornado and downburst, you know.
The Windy Dome's 106 fans require 3.2 megawatts of power that can generate winds of more than 120 kilometers per hour. The wind loads in this simulation are equivalent to an EF3 tornado with wind speeds exceeding 215 kilometers per hour.
There's a lot of experience and practice in designing for wind, but not necessarily for tornado. Tornado, when you look at the frequency of tornado happening now, we are working as we speak with National Research Council to develop the next tornado design guideline. Unfortunately, the shape of a building is dictated by other functionality. Then we end up with building like this kind of building with sharp corners that produces significant pressure, you know. Then we have a capability up to measuring up to 1,000 pressure points simultaneously, whether it is a hospital building, commercial building, or skyscraper. We evaluate that unique load for different kind of wind system, including tornado and downburst.
I think people would be surprised to know that there is nothing in the building code that talks about tornadoes or winds or sort of just something that, you know, we think about floods and we think about other things, but not wind. What solutions are out there just for, you know, for regular folks who are trying to be more climate resilient, you know, when it comes to structures, but also just kind of living in a time where we probably think, you know, tornadoes are more prevalent?
Yes, I would say there are two messages, you know, ensuring the safety of the people in terms of, luckily we have basements, you know, majority of Canadian houses have basement. In that basement, identifying a safe house is a best practice. Then next to safety, keeping your property, that would require enhancing the way we build houses, particularly the roof-to-wall connection, the wall-to-foundation connection has to improve, you know.
But I do want to mention for people who live in condos, in these high-rise glass towers in lots of urban populated areas, what do they do?
Just stay away from the glasses, the windows, you know. Go to a walled interior room, it could be a bathroom or a washroom, you know. Then as part of that process, facilities like the WindEEE, they are generating useful information. We are working closely with National Research Council to propagate this kind of information into the building design codes and standards.
So what we're seeing are the impacts from climate change. It's normal to have heat waves, it's normal to have flooding and wildfire, especially in certain regions of Canada. But what we're seeing as the climate warms is the intensity and the length is just worsening. Some things are already irreversible, we can't go back. So when we lose an ice cap, for example, we can't really bring that ice back. That's irreversible. But if we hit the 1.5 mark over and over and over again, things will only get worse. There's so many decisions I can make throughout my day that reduce my personal emissions. There's so many decisions that I can make around who I vote for government that will make the decisions that I align with to reduce the country's emissions. And number two, there's the adaptation side. There are so many actions I can take around my home.
Oh, Adam, everything's okay, you're okay.
That will keep my family and my home safe when it comes to flooding, extreme heat, wildfire, and other events as well. So I like that feeling of I own the solutions, there's a lot that I can do, and I focus more on that than just the impacts and the despair of climate change.
We cannot predict exactly what will happen with extreme weather, but we do know that temperatures will continue to climb. We can all be more prepared and more climate resilient with just a few small changes. To follow the conversation here and online, follow the thread. I'm Nam Kiwanuka, and we'll see you next time.